introduction, and I would like to give the floor to Colin, who's going to try to put a little bit of order in this wild cyberspace.
Homo sapiens sapiens are thus the apex predator on planet Earth, the apex species on planet Earth, not because of our musculoskeletal strength, neither because of our capacity to operate as a predator. In fact, we are remarkably specialized as predators, neither because we are particularly hardy or resilient. In fact, individually, we are remarkably easy to kill. Once we get to the mind and the body, then we begin to get somewhere close to the differentiating characteristic of Homo sapiens sapiens, but even that's not enough. Actually, it's our capacity to coalesce and organize into societies. This is what makes us what we are. Our relationship to information is definitional and existential. We are based upon information. Each one of you represents the encoding of a sequence of information. Information is intimately, inextricably bound with the human condition. Our societies are based upon, predicated upon the ability to store, accumulate, analyze, and transmit information. As our societies become more complex and more sophisticated, and cities take on the dimensions of what were once nation states, these imperatives become more, not less pressing. We know from evolutionary theory that open systems are adaptive systems are survivable systems, closed systems ultimately die. The internet, the World Wide Web are components of cyber, it's true. To understand cyber, we have to understand its proximity and its relationship to the human condition, therefore to information. So, the technical dimensions are part of it. The globalization is part of it. Its extension from the Internet of Information to the Internet of Things is part of it. By themselves, these are necessary but not sufficient conditions for understanding and explaining cyber. Cyber is about a set of relationships between humans and machines. The tools of the Industrial Revolution augmented human muscle. The tools of the cyber age augment the human mind. There is a profound difference. This is a story, cyber, a story about humans and machines operating in symbiotic relationships. How much of the meat goes into the machine? How much of the machine goes into the meat before the distinction, the boundary between the two becomes effectively obsolete? Cyber is transforming our relationship to information. It's transforming the very nature of the human condition itself. We think perhaps that the term cyber came to us from the fictive imaginings of William Gibson, the vast collective hallucination of non-space, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Actually, it didn't really. It came to us from Norbert Wiener, an American mathematician operating in the second half of the 20th century. He wrote some good old-fashioned books. The first, Cybernetics, Command and Control in the Animal and the Machine. The second, the popularization of those ideas, exploring the new science of cyber and cybernetics and its connection to human society. And the third, God and Golem, Inc., in which he identified the three characteristics of a cybernetic system: machines which learn, machines which reproduce themselves. Von Neumann provided the mathematical proof, if you're interested, and the coordination of machine and man. In 1517, Martin Luther did thus. That isn't the real story. The real story is that those theses were printed and 300,000 of them were circulated across Europe. A century later, this is produced, the centenary broadsheet. Observe the pen of Luther knocking the Pope's crown off. Observe the direct human relationship between God, mediated by not the priest, not the elite, not those in control, who had been in control, but by the book. When you transform the human relationship to information, and when you transform the power structures around the human relationship to information, you transform everything. That broadsheet, produced on the eve of a war, a particularly nasty and bloody war, waged for 30 years, horrendous casualties, produced a map of Europe as we now know it. Well, it's disintegrating now, but it lasted for a wee while. More than that, it produced the notion of Westphalian sovereignty, the sovereign nation state, the idea, the collective myth, the hallucination that the nation state is sovereign, is the sole exclusive legitimate exerciser of force, and so on and so forth. We face now an adversary for whom the nation state is not merely an irrelevance, it is a blasphemy to be swept away. This adversary is cyber-enabled. The state has lost its monopoly over the control of the means of exchange. The state has lost its control over access to capital. Capital once accessed only by a minority. Capitalism, no more. The state has lost its control over the production and exercise of the means of lethal force. Well, it has in America for some time now, but more generally thus. You take modern notions of law of armed conflict and international humanitarian law, you attempt them to map them onto a reality dominated by these constructs, they fail. In IHL, there is a prohibition on impersonating the sigils and the signs of the adversary, flying a false flag. Does that obtain to stealing and misusing a digital certificate? We don't know. If you steal and misuse a digital certificate, have you committed a war crime? We don't know. Capitalism has changed. The nature of the means of production and access to the means of production has changed. In a democracy, the concrete exercise of protest, lawful, peaceful protest, is absolutely critical. You don't have that, you don't have democracy. What is the manifestation of the exercise of lawful and peaceful protest in the cyber domain? Don't know. Protest does, by definition, even if lawful and peaceful, cause disruption. It is dissonant and discordant and it upsets. That's the point. You don't have it, you don't have a democracy. I don't know whether DDoS should properly be defined as a riot or as the exercise of lawful protest. I do know that I'm deeply uncomfortable that the people who are making the running in this argument are anonymous and not us. That makes me very, very worried. I came into this business at the tail end of the first crypto war. We are probably seeing the opening skirmishes in the second crypto war. The British Prime Minister David Cameron is on record as saying that he wants to restrict the citizens' access to strong cryptography. Discuss. Oh, how we laughed. And then one of our own centre-right politicians says exactly the same thing. Is access to the internet a fundamental human right? If it is, it is. If it isn't, it isn't. You can't have it both ways. We have reached the point, ladies and gentlemen, where this aphorism is true. The state lives in fear of the cyber-enabled citizen. The citizen lives in fear of the cyber-enabled state. For a democracy to exist, the state must live in fear of its citizens, not the other way round. For democracy to exist, the state must be able to exercise covert surveillance. For a democracy to exist, the state must be able to exercise force, externally and internally, including lethal force. This is the predicate of Westphalian sovereignty. Democracy depends upon the rule of law. Democracy depends upon the limitation of the power of the state by law and the exercise of accountability through democratic processes. These are difficult questions. These are difficult and challenging questions. Consider this. When I take private and sensitive communication and I seal it in an envelope, I invoke a contract between me and the state, certainly in the United Kingdom. The state has the power to breach the envelope and read even the most secret and sensitive of my communications, providing the rules are followed. The strength of the contract and the invocation of the contract comes not from the strength of mechanism of the envelope. That's trivial and meaningless. It comes from the existence of semiotic philosophical constructs. So when we start talking, for instance, about privacy being possible or impossible on the internet, in the cyber domain, forget the technical dimensions. They are largely irrelevant. What matters is what goes on inside people's heads. Our claims to the legitimacy of democracy and to our democratic legitimacy are neither uncontested nor uncontestable. We now have to set about the task of refreshing and renewing our democracy and its legitimacy, not with blood, but with bits and bytes. Thank you.